Hello.
Hey.
So this is Biweekly again, number 39. Today is the book club episode. We are going to be talking about the book called Surely You Are Joking, Mr. Feynman. But before that, we need to introduce hosts, right? Before we do introduction of the topic. So let's unwind that. And the host is still here. It's me, Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava Rodinsky.
And yes, we will be talking about the book.
You see, the practice, you fell out of practice.
Yeah,
with the intros.
For sure. I got a little bit too excited over here.
So the book, and we don't have any follow-up, do we?
No, we do. I especially wanted to thank Valeria for leaving a comment after one of the previous episodes video on YouTube and sharing some words of appreciation and telling the story how she came to know about our podcast, and we are really happy to hear that. I was really happy to hear the story, and glad that we have people who listen to us and stick with our stories.
Kind of makes the statistics that we see at YouTube and podcast players more vivid. There are some live humans
more
behind that,
right? So that's not just bots that are downloading our audio files for whatever reason. Cool. Glad to connect. So the book
was really. I'm surprised we haven't discussed it yet, because I think you were supposed to say like that's the book we should listen, but for whatever reason, I was on a barbecue with an official in the education system of Ukraine and a guy from Ukrainian military. It was this, countryside barbecue time, and we started talking about books, and they said like, "Oh, this physician, like he's a physicist who was doing a lot of experiments during the Manhattan Project and afterwards, and he was a great guy." And they were so intensely recommending watching something from Feynman that I kind of expected you would do it, because you were the source of all physics in my life for the past few years, and all the formulas and theorems and concepts that I would get were usually coming from you. So it was something new and fresh, and I thought like, maybe I can listen to something about science before you, and then suggest that we discuss it. And in the process, I really liked the style of the book. It was a lot of fun, and it's kind of biographical, but it's fiction at the same time, the way I consider it. It's live dialogues, but they are written from memory, and that was fun. So I thought that you should enjoy it, and there will be something to discuss, definitely.
The story is interesting because I read this book back in the day, but like with many things with me, kind of I would read something, I would maybe refer to it internally sometimes, but then in terms of if someone asks me like what to read next and stuff, I would not be going back into the things I've read, but I'll be looking for something like more contemporary and new to read. And this is weird. I as the book often says, I learned something from this description from you. But indeed, I think this is an autobiographical book, right, by Richard Feynman, who is a extremely well-known and famous physicist, a theoretical physicist, I would say. He's a Nobel Prize winner, and he made a lot of advances and and discoveries in the world of nuclear physics, nuclear and subatomic physics.
And the book basically describes different life episodes from high school to college to his professional activities. And it's not strictly chronological. It jumps here and there. It's mostly chronological from childhood to adulthood, but sometimes he just rolls back to Manhattan Project after a few chapters of telling how he was living afterwards. It's not very straightforward in this regard, but I think it doesn't change the concept because it's basically a collection of different stories.
Yep, it's a collection of his life stories, and I think it would be worth mentioning. Well, not just mentioning, but highlighting that this is not a book about science, right? It's just a book about life of Richard Feynman, largely outside of his quote unquote professional occupation as a physicist. That's a whole bunch of things that he did outside of that.
Yeah, like because most of the stories from Manhattan Projects were about cracking safes and not the actual job that he was doing there.
Mm-hmm. I also liked the style of the book. It uses simple, no fuss language, which is great. It's an easy listen. I think. Did you listen to audiobook or did you read it this time around? And I think probably we got the same narration, and I think narration there was really, really good. It made the book kind of pop, at least for me. I think good job over there. And a few other notes on style is I felt somehow I noticed that he at least more than one, definitely. I would want to even say that maybe half of chapters ended. He would tell a story about how he's doing like samba music or this, that, or other crazy thing, and he would end the chapter with, "I learned a lot from this," or something like this. I found it curious that this particular phrase was repeating quite often, and also I noticed that he often used the phrase like "very much," something very much. I don't know like why it jumped at me, but I couldn't help but notice that.
Another thing that was kind of curious about the style of the book is that most sentences were quite simple, like maybe 5 to 7 words. And then it would be just another sentence and another sentence, not that complex. And about the adjectives, I noticed that he tends to characterize people like, "Oh, that's a smart fellow." Like, "That's not a very smart fellow." And he was very straightforward, something you don't hear in modern books anymore.
Right, and some of the stories there were also kind of old schoolish, I would say. And like one last note on style, I think I picked up the habit of using XYZ to kind of to be a filler when you would want to say that, hey, you can do multiple different things, and like something like, yeah, you can go there, you can do XYZ and stuff like that. And I noticed that in the book he uses things, kind of phrases like such and such did something or so and so did something. And I thought, maybe I can borrow some of those stuff to make my vocabulary more diverse. It's interesting.
That is true. And you mentioned that, but I would like to highlight it once more that the narration is really good. Like all the sound effects, and whenever there were like, I'm not sure it was Italian, but it was a foreign language that he was discussing, and the narrator did a great job there. I could definitely hear the vibe.
Right. And when there was a chapter about Japan, and the guy did kind of Japan accent, I could feel it. Like, yeah, that sounds like a Japanese English accent. So you think that it was the guy who did it? Do you think they might have hired something to do that little piece, or no?
I don't know. And I don't care, to be honest. Like, I just enjoyed it so much that I didn't have time to think about such little pieces. Usually when I'm irritated, I have a lot of ideas on how to improve it. And in this case, it just went smoothly. I listened to the book while walking. I listened while riding a motorcycle, which I normally don't, and even while driving. So it was like something I really enjoyed. And then I tried listening to Feynman himself because there are some videos and things, and it didn't sound as cool. So I think the narrator did better job than Feynman himself. So shall we discuss the actual stories and the way?
Yeah, let's go into that. Was there a particular story that touched you?
I think one of the most insightful for me was the story when he was a professor, visiting professor in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, or something in South America. And he suggested how to rearrange their educational system from just memorizing and learning into actually discovering and researching and looking into why these things are needed rather than just repeating. And this thing is so relevant to me because right now I work with a lot of educational systems, including Ukrainian military system, where people just repeat stuff rather than understand what's written there and why it's written there. So it was really close. And the fact that the entire academic system, including most professors who were taking the exams and learners who were studying for the exams, were working on the same premises and with the same agreement that it's okay just to remember a lot of phrases to get a diploma and then to teach. This is wild, but this is so actual.
Right. Yeah, I also was impressed by that chapter, and I immediately it threw me back to our conversations about the cultural differences, right? And we discussed a while back a book, Culture Code, and I think that there may not have been something specifically about Brazil, but kind of cultures that might have kind of certain traditions that are very, very different and sometimes inconceivable for others. But that was very interesting and vivid how he described that students there would know how to repeat words or define, let's say, a physical phenomenon, but they would have zero clue about what that actually means and how it can be, say, used in practice and so on and so forth. Do you think that there might be a little bit of an exaggeration going on? Or do you think it's no, they were as dumb sort of as he described it in the book?
2 years ago, I would definitely say it was an exaggeration. Right now, after facing some professors and getting a bit more acquainted with the academic system, I can actually trust that it was exactly like that. Because a lot of things in science have changed since those years, but many things, like I was applying to get a PhD. I'm going to take an exam next month, and then I will be accepted or not in September for the sociology PhD. And just the way they write things about the program already feels very bureaucratic and lifeless. So I could definitely see how it could become a thing where people just quote other people and then quote people who quote people, and this thing grows without any practical implications.
It's interesting. I definitely kind of feel that, and it doesn't go in any way, shape, or form from my experiences when I touched the educational system. But at the same time, it also feels to me that there were people who were like that, but also there were people who were kind of playing that game, but they knew that is all kind of, not to say fakery, but a little bit of a shallow thing, but there is some substance behind that. And all right, professor wants me to memorize, I'll memorize, but then if I'm interested in something, I'll try to dig deeper and maybe to connect with people who are interested in this thing at the deeper level. So I'm not too certain about saying that 100% of system in Brazil were like that, with the exception of 2 students who recently came from Germany or elsewhere, and 1 professor who was also educated outside of that system.
I would totally believe that. And I think that even people who think differently might have been in that system. Option 1, he couldn't have met them. And option 2, that they might have given up right before that, because that's what I see in the army. For example, there are people who want to do differently, but then they just, after a year or two, try and they just can't handle it, because if people in charge of the system don't care about the efficiency or don't care about the purpose, then at a certain point you just can't handle it anymore, because you don't have the authority to do that. You have quite limited activities and resources. For instance, you're a professor in a university, and if you're the only professor who considers some practical implications of your subject, and then everyone else, everywhere else, teaches theoretical concepts and memorizing, then you just won't survive there for long, because people, even who come to your classroom, they are just focused on different things. You have to fight against the tide, which is really tough.
Yeah, definitely. Going alone against the system or against the tide, as you put it, takes tremendous amounts of energy, and yeah, it's just unsustainable in the long term. Like it would be a question of how long you can sustain that, and that's it. But I guess that sort of brings me to now 3 kind of takeaways from that section and that discussion. One would be that still pay attention to cultural differences, because they are real, and it helps to understand where people are coming from, not to kind of discard whatever the behavior you are observing, which might look weird. That's number one. Number two, kind of diversity matters, right? Those folks who were from Germany or like who were special. It helps if you kind of expand your horizons, but also to our last point, being an ally to someone who is trying to change stuff. Maybe the idea is not entirely great, but just supporting and creating more diversity and exploring things from different perspectives and angles is a worthy endeavor, and it would be nice to show support to those people.
Before I ask you about the most memorable story for you, I would like to save you some time on the follow-up next episode, and getting back to our cross-cultural discussion and another book club. And this is what actually happened there. We were supposed to discuss a book named The Culture Map, which you then mixed up to The Culture Code. And this is what happened again in this episode. So, dear listeners, it was The Culture Map.
This was the culture map. I don't know. I truly don't know why I said culture code, because I have this Notion thing opened in front of me. There is a list of episodes, and I very clearly can see there, episode number 16, it says culture map, book club in parentheses. Why did I say culture code? I wouldn't know for the life of me. And thanks for real-time correction over here.
So what was the most memorable story from this book for you then?
I would not... Most memorable, I'm not sure, but the most intriguing and thought-provoking for me was that chapter about his foray into art, where he picked up drawing through rather accidental set of circumstances. His friend or roommate or whoever else was a painter, and he became interested in painting and decided to learn drawing to an extent that he went to took some classes, draw models, had a personal exhibition of sorts, and had his works of art sold to not necessarily collectors, but people who were interested in that. And it was very, very interesting to me, especially given that recently I myself went through a course on photography from a well-known and renowned Ukrainian photographer, Taras Bychko, and this was a course about the kind of not just the photography. I take the picture of the label in the supermarket to know to compare this product to something else, but like higher art photography where an artist or author would have an idea they try to convey and stuff like that. And it was very, very interesting topic for me in general, which is not devoid of controversy. And it was really interesting to hear Feynman's perspective of his foray into this place, because he also admitted that being a physicist and scientist, he discarded like art and humanities as like yeah, the thing exists. It's not for me. I'm not too interested in that. There is a lot of fakery. But then him saying that he went to, where did he go to Italy, like to some places, to Sixtine Chapel or something like that, and he was able to say, oh, there are 16 works out there and I like all of them but the two, and then figure out that the two works were done not by the great masters but some like lesser masters, and he was able to tell the difference without knowing the history was really interesting.
Plus, I think the learning process is also curious there, because I think the approach he took was very scientific. He was trying to find some methods and ways to draw at first, and then later looking for his style and giving up the strict method and going into more of a feeling and gut feeling, which probably feels very counterintuitive when you are working with hard science.
Right. Indeed, that there is. It does feel or seem like that there in art and related spaces there is no kind of algorithm. And as I think it was this chapter where he was talking about getting an advice of kind of you should loosen up and kind of let the thing just flow. It is very similar to the things that we discussed in the photography course as well. It's just like just feel it. Like there's no like don't look for the rule of thirds and this, that, or other thing. Just like feel what's going on, like and kind of let it guide your framing and pressing the shutter button. It was really interesting to me. And one other thought I had in relation to this article, not to this article, to this book and to this chapter in this book, is how differently I perceive it comparing to my first reading of it, because I don't remembering anything about this particular chapter when I first read it.
Could you have skipped it?
I don't think so, because I'm a kind of person who I either drop the book or I just read it through. I extremely rarely, if ever, kind of skip parts. So I don't think I have skipped it, but I think I would not be interested in that at all, and maybe discard it, or like, okay, he's a rich, well-known guy at this point. He's just doing fancy stuff by a rich guy. But now I noticed like more nuance in that transformation of his and his view of the art.
Mm-hmm. And this episode with art is very similar to the music episode to me, because these are both things where he was trying to learn something out of his expertise. I think what I find similar there is that I don't quite remember what was the musical instrument he was playing. Drums?
Drums. Yeah, some sort of not regular, straightforward drums, but some ethnic kind of drums, stuff like that. Like African.
Let's say some kind of drums. And I think that what kind of stood out to me, that in both cases he was really serious about not getting his previous reputation influence his progress there. That he didn't want people to invite him to drum just because, and it was important that people don't know who he is, and they would invite him just because of the music or just because of the art, not because it's a professor of physics who drew something.
Right, yeah. That also, like that particular thing and idea stood out to me. The idea that he wanted his kind of art exercises to be appreciated because they're good, not because that this is just a novelty of professor of physics doing artsy stuff.
I think that one of the highlights here is that he kept his mind open, and he was open to different cross-sectoral things. And this is, I think, what makes great people in a specific domain, because they can then bring stuff from this domain to other domains. And in this art section story, some of his books, not books, some of his paintings were somehow related. Like I don't remember, was it sound waves or some kind of waves that was depicting the concept of something into the art. And this is really interesting. I think this is what makes new styles and starts new trends somewhere, when you take thing from one area of expertise and you fulfill it in the other.
Yep, that's true. And interesting that you mentioned, I didn't mention at all, but you mentioned his musical endeavors, and now I remember that in principle his musical endeavors were similar to his drawing endeavors, right? Something triggered his interest, he went deeper into that and ended up going to quite a high level in that area. And I think maybe the art story resonated with me a little bit more because I myself a little bit into visual arts, and maybe the musical story resonated more with you because you are more into music than I am.
Well, the third story, I think, of the same kind is the Safe Kraken. And it kind of shows the pattern of just getting curious, trying the first things, and especially as you fail for the first few times, your reaction to these fails and how you learn from your mistakes and what you do next. And then the outcomes that you get and how the mastery actually is shaped.
And one other thing, maybe slightly different perspective on his, like, all of the stories in the book, including the more controversial ones, was that it felt like he always kept kind of open-minded approach to things, and the way I describe it inside my head would be he made himself available to those adventures. He didn't say, oh, I'm a physicist, like I'm not interested in this music thing. No, he instead, folks are doing that samba carnival training, like can I join them? Like, can I do like some whatever the musical instrument he picked up, which led him to take part in Rio de Janeiro carnival? And like with drums, he picked up drums, and then he ended up playing for a ballet in San Francisco with his drums. And I think it takes certain kind of mindset and openness to the world, or making yourself available to the world to be able to find and catch those opportunities, for the lack of a better word. And I'm, to be honest, quite a bit jealous of such an ability, because I think I myself is a lot more stiff, and I was like, oh no, that's sort of not necessarily beneath me, but that's outside of my of who I am, and therefore I would say no to things. But when I do say yes to some of those interesting adventures, I'm really happy that I said yes.
And I think that we kind of focus on his learning process and open mindset and forget about the social aspect of building a relationship and friendships and stuff, because to me it felt as if he felt really awkward talking to people at first, and social interactions seemed really hard, and he had to invest a lot into getting into this social area. And even like from different episodes, from negotiating the salary to the girls thing where he was learning how to talk to the bar people, and how to navigate through this bar culture and the types of friendships he got there, and even the way he described how people considered him as a really strange guy, makes me feel that he had to invest a lot into this social learning, how to behave and not seem really out of place.
That's right. I think in the initial chapters of the book, he even admitted that I'm socially awkward. When in the university and stuff, he relied on his friends or classmates to help him out with some of that stuff. But then by the later stages in the book, and I guess later stages of his life, he was a bit more unconstrained, if I may use this word, in those interactions, which led him to a whole bunch of interesting acquaintances there. The bar story sounded like the bar related stories sounded a bit cringy to me. Maybe that's just because we now live in 2024, and that kind of somewhat misogynistic point of view and approach and attitude towards people in the bar, especially women. I wonder how much of that was an exaggeration, once again, for the purposes of just entertaining the audience, but it did rub me the wrong way sometimes.
One interesting thing I noticed apart from this was how interesting it is the way you react to authorities. In terms of physics, he basically had no authorities. Like, it didn't matter whether it was Oppenheimer or Einstein or whoever it was. He was so interested in physics that he didn't care. But in some other areas, like in terms of music, art, or any other things, authorities did matter. And it's curious how the same mind could react to the concept of authority in different fields in different ways. Like, oh, that's like the master, or he knows how to do that well. And in terms of physics, he would doubt people who had the formal and informal leadership in different fields and areas of physics. And it helped him a lot in terms of physics. And I wonder how much it slowed him down in other areas then.
Oh, that's a great observation. Because indeed, in his stories about physics, he was not looking at faces, but just like, give me the proof. Like, what's the logic? What's the rationale behind stuff? And then in others, he in artsy stories, he relied on other people to kind of gauge what he's doing and provide feedback and judge his work. Interesting. And I wonder if that is kind of a trait of, not to say trait of greatness, but if you are able to overcome that piety towards authorities and hold everyone accountable for what they are saying, and then kind of judge things on their merit, if this is a sign or necessary part of a recipe of greatness in the end of the day. Because I can imagine then that in music and in art, the great artists were rebels maybe at some point by discarding the existing authorities and not going with the flow, but saying, no, I see it this way, this is how I'll do it. And then everyone came around and said, oh, yeah, that sounds and looks great. Yeah, let's give us more of that.
I don't think I can extrapolate that to other areas because I think that all operate differently. In terms of science, critical thinking is probably the core skill, and you have to doubt things. And if you're blinded by an authority, then you're just wasting time. And in things like, let's say, politics, I think that being a rebel quite quickly just kicks you out of the system, and you don't get to show how talented and smart you are just because it's not numbers that prove it. You have to build the connections and relations, being diplomatic and all these kind of things. And this is where you have to play by the book, and you can't really break a lot of rules. You can change some, you can doubt some, but you have to accept the majority and follow the lead in many cases.
Yeah, I think that's right. The specifics and dynamics of a particular field play a huge role. And funny what you said about the politicians. Remember in one of the previous episodes, I referred to this series in 99% Invisible on the Power Broker book, and in one of the episodes, the guest there was Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a congresswoman from New York district in the US. And one of the things she said is that she was on her second term in the Congress, or something along those lines. And she said that your first term you used just to learn the rule of the land there, like what building connections, understanding the things, how things operate and how things work there. And only after you understood that, you can meaningfully start changing things around. It is extremely difficult on your first way in, which sort of makes sense. It's a little bit sad in one sense, but I guess it has to be that way in another sense.
Yeah, but I mean, before you can actually change some systems, you have to become part of the system to change it. For other systems, you can disassemble them just from the outside and reconstruct and rebuild. And in physics, it's easy because basically there are laws and rules, and if they don't compute, then they don't compute. In human relationships, it's harder. In music, it's just another kind of thing. And yes, you can create your own style, which will never get popular, and you will be the YouTuber with 200 subscriptions for the rest of your days.
Yep, physical constraints make a lot of sense, right? That you cannot fool them. If thing doesn't work, then it doesn't work.
I think one of the last things I wanted to highlight from this book from my side was the way he looked at education. And the idea that I think he was mostly studying at MIT, and then he went for postgraduate degree for another
Cornell, I think.
Cornell, probably.
Cornell
yeah.
University.
I'm not sure about that, but it was not MIT, and that's the point. That I think that the way he approached this is really curious. That's kind of a continuation of the story about authorities, because MIT was the most prestigious place where most of the science was happening. But when he heard an intriguing idea that he should see how science works in real life and where the experiments are actually done without all this huge equipment and expensive, fancy stuff, because you can generate a lot of data and a lot of experience from a very basic set of environment. And he tried that, and I think that he did it in all other iterations. Like he would not look for a perfect or the best scenario, but rather see like what can be done. Like, all right, that's the music teacher I have. Let's see what I can get. All right, I'm locked in this town. How can I crack the safes here? Just knowing what I know.
Right. That's a deep thought, right there that you're offering. Because indeed we. Well, speaking for myself, I'm saying we, but I mean, like I think was when I was growing up, there was this idea that you want to take the best, right? When you go to, I don't know, the farmer's market to buy some tomatoes, you don't buy the first tomatoes you like. You go around everything to see which tomatoes are the best, and you buy those. And with other stuff as well, like even now we would go to review sites to see like what are the best sneakers, or like what are the best running shoes and stuff like that. And I was telling to myself and to other people as well that most of the time you don't need the best, you just need good enough. Like there is the bar above which everything else is mostly a diminishing returns unless you have a reason to set that bar higher. And here you say that you don't need to figure out what's the best art class in your town or your country or the world as a whole. Like, who is the person next to you who you can learn something from and just go with that? That's such a deep thought. Yeah, thank you for that.
That's sudden, right? Something you don't expect from such books, because it's not just the stories themselves, it's how you reflect on them. And for me, this book was really thought-provoking, and that's why I liked it. It's not the answers that he was suggesting, but it's the lessons you can learn from his lessons.
Right. But then also, right, and then when he was doing that carnival thing, he didn't look for the best band to join or something. He happened to be on that street, so he joined that street's band or whatever.
Yeah,
Whatever
and the
was.
Japan, like, don't take me to the fanciest hotel with European food. I would like to try local, and anything local. Just bring me something real.
But then that makes a lot of sense. But I also wonder if there is, not say difference, but distinction between his professional field of physics and those other fields where he was like an amateur exploring the particular area of interest, where he had the stakes for him were relatively low, so he could go with whatever. Because, like, as we just discussed in physics, he went to Cornell because he thought that, oh, they have the best setup for experimentation, and a lot of interesting experimental results were coming from Cornell and their quirky and not shiny, not gold-plated the equipment that they had. So he
actually had no idea what kind of equipment they had. It was when he came to there and he saw the lab, he realized it's not that, and that there is a contrast. But I think, to me, it's very illustrative how he reacted to the Nobel Prize. Because if he was focused on the recognition or status or some kind of fanciness, Nobel Prize is something I think most people in physics would like to get. Like, that's an accomplishment that kind of highlights your career and defines your attitude to your work and many other things. And the way he wanted to just skip this part, like, can we not do that? Like, I'd like to go back to my work, is something very illustrative to me.
It's interesting. Yeah, I sort of agree with that, but then I also wonder how much truth to all of that.
That is fair.
Is because I don't, my exposure to autobiographies is naturally very, very limited. I'm not an avid reader, and especially not an avid reader of this kind of literature. But there's recently in our work-based book club, one of the first book we read there was the book called Taste by Stanley Tucci. He's an actor, like rather famous actor. I think he was at least nominated for Oscars, and he won some other awards as well. And this was his autobiography, which he told about his life through his love of food, and especially Italian food. And there are things there, like when you read the biography, he said, oh, he's such a nice guy, caring husband and stuff like that. His first wife, I think he died of cancer, something along those lines. But then if you read outside of that, even on Wikipedia, you get a different picture, different perspective. You get to know different Stanley Tucci, who was meeting another woman in public while he was still married to his first wife, who later died of cancer. So it's not at all the same thing that he portrayed in that book. So I have to be a little bit cynical about, like, is this entirely true? Of course, that there must be some kernel of truth to that, but then the degree of that is something that we might never know.
Our brain does tend to depict some things differently, and even when I remember some of the episodes of my life, I can definitely say that I can imagine that I felt something different, the way, not like I remember it right now, especially if it's something important, like let's say the first days of the war. Like, I would definitely remember it very differently from what it felt back in the day. But at the same time, if we compare the facts, which is easier, like you mentioned, if somebody spotted him with another lady, that's a fact, and this is something to check. We can't really check what was happening in the mind, and you take it with a grain of salt, definitely.
At the same time, this his reaction to Nobel Prize would be in line with his overall kind of rejection of authority and not carving for that for recognition.
And the same thing with his jobs and the way he picked his careers. I think it's also quite illustrative that the process of learning and curiosity was much more important than any kind of status.
Right.
And I also like that he was skeptical about rejecting the higher paid jobs, knowing his tendencies and his mindset, that he likes pleasure and he will definitely go the wrong way if he gets extra resources. So maybe he shouldn't. That also makes a lot of sense.
And then there was, to switch gears a little bit, there was this interesting episode, and I wanted to think about it a little bit more, which I didn't have a chance to. But I found interesting that element when he was working on Manhattan Project, and then people initially were a little bit like not apprehensive about this, like that this is the work we do and stuff like that. But then many of them started realizing that, oh wow, we are unleashing a demon on the world and stuff like that. And then he said that he developed a mindset of some sort of ignorance, or like something that allowed him not to worry too much about that kind of thing. And I wanted to think about that a little bit more, to see like what's there, what that kind of mindset, and how to develop maybe a little bit of that. Because I don't know about you, but I sometimes worry that I worry about too many things in too strong of a way, which is often counterproductive and stuff.
I think we do mention Stoic philosophers too often, but I would still try once more, because I think that there are two sides, two ways to look at this. One is that you just tend to worry in general, and that's one kind of an issue. And the other one is that you tend to worry about underlying philosophical aspects, and there is an internal conflict happening. So if you're just a worrisome guy and you just need peace, then just workout, diaries, psychotherapy, and stuff helps. But in the other case, if there is an internal conflict and you would like to not just quiet it down, but to resolve it, or like in his case, if you remember about the jobs, he decided not to decide. And this is something he could do when he faced an internal conflict. Just like, all right, I choose not to choose, or I choose this way, and it doesn't really matter what happens afterwards. I'm not going to change my decision because it's too difficult and I get confused, and it kind of blocks me from being alive. And this is where I stop. Like, I take this choice and I take the responsibility to whatever happens if I go this way.
That makes sense. And do you think that has a connection maybe to his ability and also desire to sort of stay true to himself, right? Maybe that's connected a little bit to rejection of authority. He would say like, oh, like I'll do things I want, I'll do things I'm interested in, and I sort of reject pursuing things or ideas that might be outside to who I am. Like, I'm a curious guy, I want to explore this realm of music, yeah, let's go into that with drumming and whatever else.
You know what's interesting? I just, as you were saying this, I thought about the most authentic people I know, like people who are really sincere and open to being themselves. And they pretty much never mention that. Like, they never say true myself, true self, what I need. They just don't operate with this kind of things. They basically don't really have anything to compare with. Like, they don't see another way. Let's put it this way. And people who kind of struggle there, and they have to compare their interests and interests of others and all these kind of things, and they have stronger external reference to public opinions. they mention this like true self and my needs and my way more often than people who actually practice that.
So basically, you are saying that in theory there is no difference between the two things, but in practice that there is. Interesting. That's right. People just, yep. If they just live that, it's just.
You can try convincing yourself or just make an effort, but then when you start making an effort, who actually decides like what is true self and how much your true self changes from day to day? And it's a feeling, like basically you just intuitively do these kind of things or you don't.
You're risking of throwing our discussion in never-ending portal, self-referential fractal spin of like who decides of what. Am I really deciding that? Is this really my decision? If I'm thinking about it, or is it that something external prompted me to question myself?
We are at a very dangerous spot. Does it somehow mean that we should slow down and get back to the book?
Or take it easy? Yes, for sure.
Anything else you'd like to mention, like something from the notes maybe?
I think maybe it's what was mentioning. I didn't realize, and I haven't had a chance to check if that's true. I didn't realize that the cargo cult kind of term and kind of this introduction of this whole idea into mass culture may be done by Feynman as well, right? Is the last chapter in the book was his commencement speech in 80s, I guess, in some sort of university, and there he spoke about the cargo cult, and I wonder if this was the first time this whole notion was introduced into the popular culture, but maybe not, because he says that, hey, I started calling this cargo cult, and we refer to this thing as cargo cult presently. Maybe we can do a little bit of real-time follow-up and Google cargo cult.
So you definitely don't give up on follow-ups, right?
No.
We just saved it from one, but here's another one coming.
Of course, follow-ups are great, right? Because they create this continuity and learning and stuff like that, and correction of mistakes and perpetuation of greatness.
I've learned a lot from my follow-ups.
Yes. And I liked it very much.
Yes. Follow-ups are nice. Speaking of which, who do you think should read this book? Like, who do you recommend it to? Definitely not everyone, but who would benefit from reading it?
Interesting. To buy myself some time to think of an answer, I would throw a counter-answer to you when you say that definitely not people who should not read this book.
People who have never read any autobiographies, because I think that reading about a guy reflecting on his life is just weird, and this wouldn't be the book I would start with. Like, I would read something more chronological and straightforward, because this thing is all over the place and it jumps from place to place. The stories are usually not connected, and at a certain point you can get confused, like, so which wife, like, what, it's wife number 2 or wife number, what is happening here? And I would definitely recommend this book to people who listen, and I'm not sure it's as fun to read as it is to listen.
I think still that's fair. I think maybe if people kind of get to read this book not as autobiography but just a collection of stories, it might be helpful, because they're witty and fun and interesting in their own right, even if it was not, if we remove Feynman from
I would say that you can understand the wit in many cases just because you understand the subject. Like, you know the physics, you know how to solve the puzzles. You can see that the way he solved it is actually smart. If you're just very far away from math, physics, and all these kind of puzzles, most of the words you don't understand, you can get really frustrated because, like, oh, this is how I solve algorithms. Like, nice, good for you. I felt a few chapters. I don't remember what was the calculations that he was bragging about that he could perform. Some difficult calculations that people used charts for, and like in the middle of that story, I felt like I still understand what it is about, but I'm kind of losing the track of how lucky he was, or like how things operated there. And there were a few elements where like pretty nice, but like I'm kind of losing it. And I'm an engineer. Like I learned that kind of stuff. I can imagine the person who studied Spanish as the major and haven't been doing any math or physics since high school might not appreciate some of the chapters, even though it's not the science book. Like he doesn't explain science that much.
That's totally fair, because when he says like I was able to do this calculation by, I guess, like he would use series representation of functions, and for someone who understands series, that would totally make sense, because series have each further member represents a smaller fraction of the whole thing, and you might just calculate one or two, three initial members of the series to get the sufficiently accurate.
This is answer. Exactly like if you're listening to Dima right now and it doesn't make sense, I think this book is not for you. Like that's the threshold.
But this was a small portion. That the music part, the art part, the Japan, the Brazil part. Even though you would not understand the definitions, I, for once, did not understand all of the definitions they were referring to in the Brazil chapter. But this whole idea of educational system that is rooted on memorizing and stuff like that, it kind of makes sense. But I do agree with you. Yeah, from that perspective, yes, probably that's not the book for everyone. I think I would still encourage younger people, especially maybe those who are students, and especially those who are students in like science related subjects, to read this book, to see that there is a world. The world is big, and there are other subjects, and they're interesting in their own right, even though it might seem like something like philosophy or, I don't know, art or music are like nah. It's not as hard as hard. I mean, in a sense that is very logical and so on. Not as hard as science, but they're still interesting, and one can learn a lot from that as well. And likewise, maybe students in humanities could also kind of read this book to understand the mindset of those sciencey people, to see how they think, and maybe find better ways of connecting with them and communicating with them as well.
Mm-hmm. I totally see how it could be useful, and it's just fun. Like I would say that this book is more fun than useful. And my biggest takeaway is an opportunity to see the mindset of another person who thinks differently about systems, about education, about pretty much everything. I think he thinks differently, and it was very refreshing. So I felt that I can now reconsider some of my decisions and thoughts, and through the prism of this way of thinking, and that's what I enjoyed.
Right, and maybe one thing that adds to that is that the book and the stories are totally devoid of that thing that you might expect from a Nobel Prize winner and like world-renowned physicists that say, "Oh, look, like I'm a Nobel Prize winner. Look how great I am. Look at those great things I did." There's nothing like that at all. It's just like, hey, I went into a bar and then I kind of became a chauffeur for this big shot guy that goes around bars in Las Vegas, and there was nothing of no snobbery, no nothing, and that was what also makes the stories interesting, a little bit unexpected, and
Or another
fresh.
example of the same thing is when somebody, I didn't remember what kind of job, but somebody offered him a job. And he said, oh, you probably made a mistake. Like, it can be me. It's definitely not my kind of thing. You made a mistake. And then his wife had to persuade him, like, no, if they made a mistake, it's their mistake. You can take the job.
Right.
So it was a fun read. And
it was
nice discussing it as well. Somehow a bit insightful.
Yes, that's definitely great. Great read, great discussion. Once again, thanks for bringing this book to our shared attention. And I guess we will see each other in a week. Something.
In a week or so,
2 weeks.
and hopefully in a good week.
Give or take. See you.